What's up, everybody? Peter Exodus O'Coffer here. Gonna open up sort of a new line of inquiry here. I'm gonna do a monthly podcast called Three Things. It's gonna focus on music, and it's gonna focus on three aspects of music that I learned from the month before. So this is either research or just trends as I see them. And it'll give me a chance to kind of stretch out and let my Gemini side run a little free, a little unstructured, because some of these things probably would not end up in the more structured episodes that I do. So I'm doing April 2023, and there are the three things of the month. Number one, the mafia and the music business. There's a pattern popping up here as I, you know, uh, study interesting uh, people in the music industry, and that's one of them. Number two, the songs on the charts have not been moving that much this year, I'm gonna get into that as well. And three, um, I'm starting to do some research. Big fan of electronic dance music, and seeing the impact that funk has had on dance music has been interesting. So topic one, the mafia and the music industry. So it's kind of been um, not so secret that, back in, before rock and roll, I've mentioned this before, but jazz was king until the mid 40s. And it was not so secret that many of the clubs, the high end clubs at, Billie Holiday and Duke Ellington and those folks played and were mafia owned. So that's one instance of the mafia in the music industry. I'm currently reading a book on Neil Bogart, who was uh, the founder and president of Casablanca Records, which had Parliament, Kiss, and Donna Summer and other artists. I'm very interesting because eventually I want to talk legacies in music, and it's interesting because um, Kiss and it looks like even George Clinton and P Funk are basically charting a legacy and life after death for them. So, and I thought, well, the one thing that they have in common is Neil Bogart. And he really is considered a genius. So the book is called And Party Every Day. And it's interesting because he started off at Kama Sutra Records and then Buddha. And Buddha Records is a subsidiary of Kama Sutra. But the interesting thing is that, until the mid '60s, the mafia owned those record labels, which I thought was very interesting. And, the book, and Party Every Day is written by, Larry Harris, who is, Neil Bogart's second cousin and who kind of came up with, you know, uh, Bogart, moving into Casablanca. I mean, by the time Mr. Harris enters the scene, Neil Bogart's already president of Buddha Records. But it's interesting because he mentions that until the mid 60s, Buddha and Kama Sutra were mafia owned, which is interesting because that's really when, uh, Wall Street was like, you know what, we can make some money on this music thing. I mean, it was the combination of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and uh, Motown. Where okay, yeah, money. There's money in them hills, as they like to say. Other aspects. I mean, Richard Pryor joked about when he was coming up in the comedy circuit, the Chitlin circuit in the mid '60s. Uh, Leaving the Chitlin circuit and higher clubs, a lot of those clubs were mafia owned. Um, and then Alan Leeds in his book, there was a time where he talks about breaking into business, and he was a uh, the tour manager for James Brown, and the rumors that Jackie Wilson, the great Jackie Wilson, and his manager had mafia connections. And also Jimi Hendrix's manager, Michael Jeffrey, had, poor Michael, or poor Jimmy got robbed blind by his manager, Michael Jeffrey. But rumored that Michael Jeffrey had ties to the English mob there in Great Britain. And then finally, Colonel Tom Parker. We know as much money as Elvis made, Colonel Tom Parker made even more. I have the Elvis movie on my DVR, and at some point this in the next couple weeks, I'm going to give that a look. And I hear it's not very flattering of Colonel Tom. Well, hey. But Colonel Tom spent a lot of time in Vegas, gambling away the money he had stolen from Elvis. And of course, in the mid '50s, the the mob was knee deep, the mafia, and all of the casinos there in Vegas. So come on, we knew Colonel Tom had to run. Uh, Rub elbows with the mafia. And look, there were still mob hits going on in Las Vegas in the '70s. So Las Vegas is a very colorful mafia history now. Obviously, it's been cleaned up a lot. And really, the late '60s, they start slowly cleaning up the mafia. The mafia still exists, but the last big, mafia kingpin was probably oh geez, I can't remember. I can't even remember his name. The Teflon Don, John Gotti. So yeah, that was he was the last of the true mafia kingpins. Now the mafia is still around, but it's not what it was. I mean, Rico is really weakened them, but yeah, slowly but surely, I'm connecting the dots, and there is a real history, mafia history in the music business. Second fun fact from April. New songs not moving up the charts. Yeah, so let's get into that. I did an episode, in All Things Music a couple months ago about, does today's music suck? No. And I cite a Billboard article from, so October 11th, 2022 is called Too Many Songs, Not Enough Hits. Pop music is struggling to create new stars. And, in that article, they talk about some of the problems. They talk about how, the music, industry's been blindsided and has missed a lot of trends over the years. MTV, American Idol, um, streaming, all of these things that, they embraced later, they kind of laughed off, and these were all outside innovations. Um, uh, AI is a new one, the AI Drake, and probably next couple of days I have an outline. I'll be doing the AI Drake, and now the music industry's reacting to it the same way they did with Napster, and it's not going away. So that's gonna be a really fun episode when I get to that. So yeah, so I read that and put some of that stuff into um, what's going on, and it really for the first into mid March really I was shocked at how kind of telling that article was. So that article, the Billboard article, gave a couple of a little bit of data. So from 2001 to 2004, there were 30 first-time artists that got a song into the top 10. 2019, that fell to 15, and 2021, 13. So that's almost half. And so that demonstrated how difficult it was getting for um, uh, record companies to break new artists, because, new artists kind of new energy, for the industry. Problems, that this article talked about, from October 2022, and there's the glut. It's very easy now to do music. Technologies make it easier to do songs. There's just a glut, and it's hard to fight your way through that glut. Um, And then the TikTok algorithm, which is interesting. The music professionals, the marketers do not understand the TikTok algorithm. I kind of stay away from TikTok. I don't think it should be banned. I know there's a move to do that, but I think it's very addictive. And to me, the algorithm is very simple. And the reason I stay away from TikTok is the algorithm, and that, um, it figures out very quickly what you like, and it feeds you more of what you like. And I found, I would get on TikTok, to take a break, and 3 hours later I was still on TikTok, and time stopped and time got away. And I was like, wait a minute, and a lot of it was just fluff and dumb stuff for me. And I'm like, I don't have 3 hours to waste, like that. I could watch a good movie, a good documentary, um, you know, do an episode for my YouTube channel, work on music, a lot of things, do research. And so I cut it off. So, the algorithm is pretty simple, and that aspect, in that it finds what you like and quickly feeds you more stuff. And the goal of their algorithm is to keep you on there as long as possible, so you'll watch ads and they make money. How do so the algorithm is easy. How do you crack that algorithm to where your music is gets on that treadmill, so to speak, and is fed to people. um you know and in many ways, albums are now structured to, in my opinion, and I think Gen X and baby boomers would agree, that these newer albums are structured to uh, feed that algorithm, because you don't have the wide variety of music on albums that you used to have. I mean, you get an album and there'd be a couple ballads and mid-tempo stuff, up-tempo. I mean, everything is it's a lot more homogeneous sounding. And it's not, when I talk about this, today's music suck. No, it's not that these artists are less talented. It's what the labels are forcing these artists to do so that they can make the money. Um, so what did I discover? Well, I have a process, Friday night, and as long as it takes through the weekend, as I go through and listen to, some of the big charts, not Billboard, because Billboard, but so Spotify do today's hot hits, and there's usually 50 to that. Hot hits USA, another 50 songs, and a lot of times, they're the same songs in a little different order. And then Just Hits, and Just Hits has 100 songs, and it's a little more broad, and because it's 100 songs. So it's a little more broad, but it still gives you an idea of kind of what's hitting and what's popping in the music world. And then I go over to Tidal and do Tidal's top hits, which is 100 songs. And interestingly enough, I mean, very different demographics, for these streaming services. So I subscribed to a lot of them just out of curiosity. So, um, the title list is very, very, very hip hop centric. So, for whatever reason, hip hop heads, really prefer title. Um, uh, I think boomers and Gen X, tend to go to Apple Music. I'm not sure who honestly goes to, Amazon. I can track my music on Amazon, and a little bit who's listening to what. And uh, I mean, Apple and Spotify are pretty similar, but I get some really interesting results there in Amazon, so I have no idea who their demographic is. It's certainly more conservative, I think. Probably more Republican over there. Um, but yeah, so but certainly the difference between Spotify, if you look at their their hit lists and stream lists, and Tidal is hip hop. So what I found very interesting is how stagnant even Spotify, which is more pop oriented than Tidal, was until about um, mid March. And when I say static, there wasn't new songs coming in. There was the same old songs every week. And I kept thinking about, this Billboard article from that October article that I quoted again and also used in this an earlier episode. And I was just like, wow. And so finally some new stuff started making its way in to the Spotify charts. It still hasn't really moved with Tidal. I mean, if you go right now and look at Tidal's hits, a lot of that stuff is still from 2022. I mean, number one this week was um, Thames and I'll Wait for You. That was early 2022. So the charts alone, at least from these streaming folks, are saying that the record labels are having problems, breaking new talent. I mean, it is evident, from my experience there and the eye test. Can't speak for Billboard, but at least in streaming, and that's really most people, that's where they're getting their music from, is streaming now. Now, I think Billboard does take in account uh, um, radio play as well, but even the top 40 station, I kind of switched off of them recently, but they weren't really bringing in a whole lot of new music either. So it's very interesting. I've never, followed music, since the late 70s. I've never seen, just, a static period for so long. So yeah, it's a real issue, about, that's, it's not theory, from that October Billboard article. It's real. The final topic, and I guess a better note, if you ask me, is, I'm delving in and trying to understand the history of electronic dance music, and it's been kind of fun. Um, I lived in the late 70s, early 80s. I lived in suburbs of Chicago, and WBMX was the radio station. I'm not sure if it still is, but so I got a little taste every once in a while of that new house music, and particularly the early 80s, not the late 70s. But I remember getting a taste of that the early Chicago house, and then moved to Ohio, moved to New Orleans for a while, got away from that, and then landed at Purdue in 1989. And a lot of folks from Chicago came to Purdue, and then they would bring their DJs in. So then, I mean, it was still, you know, believe it or not, in the late 80s and early 90s, that's still early house music. So, Chicago was very influential in the house music because, they were the epicenter there for, 10 plus years. And so, um, loved house, at Purdue and in the early 90s. But that was gangster rap, and hip hop was political, and at least the house that they were playing at the time at Purdue wasn't as political as Public Enemy, those and those folks. So still more of a hip hop fan than a house fan, but I respected house. Interesting enough, at the time, I mean, you couldn't buy, house was not readily available in the record stores. Maybe it was in Chicago, but in West Lafayette, Indiana, I think I was able to find one house tape. And so it's nice having going being the playlist now and Spotify and finding these house playlists. The the downside of that, there were some house songs, from back in the day that I'm still looking for that I loved. Don't have no idea what they were called because Shazam didn't exist back then. So, but anyway, my foray in the house. House, what that early Chicago house was a combination of disco and funk. And it took the four to the floor, that disco, and it's interesting that early house you could hear kind of in the late 70s, 78, 79. I talked about this in the disco, you know, um, all things music, the history of disco, and you can hear 78, 79, with the better drum machines and the more prevalent of the four to the floor. But house would many of those songs would simultaneously be four to the floor and also on the one using the snare that most funk folks go listen to. Funk in the one, all things music and the different variations in the one. The most common variation of the one was emphasizing the snare. So bring, whether it's, EQ or just bringing up the volume in the mix. So, early house really emphasized that, and the early DJ, important DJ Frankie Knuckles came out, moved from New York City to Chicago, and he came up in the disco scene. So yeah. The other thing that early Chicago house had was that fat bass that I talk about uh, in the that transition from my latest episode on the funk to transition from funk to hip hop, and I talk about the late '70s, early '80s, and the hack to keeping it funky when the drum machines came along was that fat analog synthesizer bass. And so Chicago house took that fat synthesizer um analog bass and ran with it. And as by the mid '80s, as funk was kind of, I mean, it was Cameo and George Clinton and a few other people, and hip hop was taking over. That that aspect of the fat bass really kept the Chicago house scene really kept that alive. And out of that then came acid house, which acid house is some people hate the Roland TB-303, which is the bass synth. And interestingly, it's one of the early '80s instruments that Roland put out that crashed and burned, but are now classics. So it was the TB-303, the drum machines, the TR-808, and the TR-909. The TR-909 is a digital drum machine. The 808 with that fat bass is a analog, and they crashed and burned, believe it or not, when they came out. Now they're all three of them are classics, and they sort of have reissued, all three of those. But I mean, you want to get a real vintage, TR-808, that's gonna run you 7 to 12 grand now. So yeah, that's so it's interesting how Roland crashed and burned with those, but they're now they're classics. But the TB-303, what it was famous for was it, had, you would do a bass on a arpeggiator, and it would be a couple notes playing, and, one of the, think, Poker Face Lady Gaga, and that bass line early on, and it just repeats itself. Now that's a arpeggiator, and that was, very popular. Really, it came out of house. And, And it's certainly, the synthesizers in the last 10 to 12 years and the drum machine started putting arpeggiators back on because of the popularity of electronic dance music. So it came out of there, and you basically, what you do is you manipulate the resonance and the filters and the envelopes from the waveforms that make analog sounds. And it has a nasally kind of sound. Some people don't like it, but it's very, very funky, and it's very funky in its own way. Um, but this comes out of, funk used to use, resonance in this kind of sound. I mean, Bernie Royale was the keyboard player for P-Funk, and if you go back and listen to On Disco Kid and even Flashlight, he's using aspects of the what would become the TBO 303. So, I mean, he was doing it, in real time and manipulating those filters and the resonance and getting that sound. And essentially the TB303 kind of automated that with a step sequencer and amplified what Bernie Worrell was kind of exploring and doing, back in the day with Parliament. So I'd heard now, I talk about my Purdue years and my exposure to house back then. Fortunately, they brought DJs from Chicago, but they, for whatever reason, that bring the DJs that, would play acid house. And so it was more recently where I discovered acid house and immediately fell in love with acid house because it's a little bit, acid house is very funky, but it does have that psychedelic aspect to it. And if you listen to my music, I dabble in psychedelia every once in a while. I'm a huge Jimi Hendrix and Doors fan, and obviously, funkadelic, funk plus psychedelic. So, that's where I'm coming from. And the final phase is techno, and love me the playlist on Spotify, Techno Bunker. I'll rock that when I'm tired. I can, you know, give me techno bunker plus some coffee, and I'm good for a little bit. And techno takes it's four to the floor. Techno definitely um, benefits from the advances made in drum machines and effects and everything else. You get that really strong, kick drum for the floor. But the fat bass, from that late 70s and early 80s funk is very prevalent in techno. And a lot of technos also, they use the snare on the one. So even though it's almost always four to the floor. So, yeah, that's, so the funk is alive in numerous places, that's my calling card. I'm a funk dude. So the funk lives on in hip hop. Live church music, the classic funk is really, if you like that 70s funk and just, name the groups. I mean, go to church and then, those church bands. Even though the old head funk guys will tell you, if you want that type of funk, you gotta, go to church and that's where you'll find it. Um, that old school house music has the funk. Acid house, as I said, has the funk, and then techno has the funk. Now, interestingly enough, I'm starting to immerse myself into this. There's a new movement in electronic dance music called garage house, and what it essentially is going back to the roots of house, and so it's Chicago house. They're rediscovering and taking those aspects of old school Chicago house and technologically, updating that, but going back to those old principles. So yeah, funk is alive in the garage house as well. So yeah, I'm gonna do this every month, and it'll probably the first half of the next month. Um, uh, And it'll give me a chance to just, there's so much jumping off now. Uh, I'll be doing my Drake AI episode soon, but I imagine I'll be doing a lot of stuff on this whole AI phenomenon because it's just starting and it's not going anywhere. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. This is me at my Gemini best, kind of sprawling, but sometimes interesting topics, don't need to have its own episode. So hey, I got my 5 albums. Number 5 is out, so it's on the streaming services. Interestingly enough, YouTube Music, it was on there immediately, and the album was released May 1st, 2023, and here we are sitting. I think today is Saturday, May 6th, as I work on this episode, and it was just yesterday where a fully coalesced album was on normal YouTube and not YouTube Music. So the songs were scattered. I had to search around them and find them. So it's interesting. I appreciate and love YouTube's algorithm and have a fairly good understanding of it, but it's pretty slow when it comes to, you know, YouTube has its tracks as YouTube Music. There's also a YouTube track for podcasts, which I think they're doing away with, and then migrate all that to the normal track. So what I'm waiting for is, and I assume this will happen in the next couple of days, is for my new album to list with my already the other 4 albums released, and that's one of the things I loved about YouTube is that my music and my I can put my music and my um, videos and podcasts together. Not the case with Spotify. So that's why I'm using YouTube as my main platform. I'm assuming because all my albums were together that soon within the next couple of days, the new album, which is called the 317 Volume 2, will be with my other albums. But I've already taken the pertinent songs and dropped them into the playlist I curate by topic outside of my albums. So anyway, yes, I'm excited. Album 5 is coming out, and I'm gonna do smaller chunk music the rest of the year, maybe a full album, maybe not. So stay tuned, but hey, appreciate you coming through, appreciate your support. Going to try to ramp up. The legislative session was over. It's very taxing, working 50, 60 hours a week. So I'm going to try to pick up the pace as far as episodes go and as far as the number of episodes go. So thanks again, and talk to you soon.